All right, back for another segment. Yeah, so I've been doing this for most of the day. But the next story, so actually, all these stories I've been doing segments on, I'm actually excited to talk about. But this next one is actually another one that I'm excited about, and it's about good old Kanye West and his wearing of the White Lives Matter shirt at some kind of fashion event in, I believe it was Paris. So I'm gonna cue the intro with the intro video from I believe it was Entertainment Tonight, and then I'm gonna give my perspective on it. Here goes.
Another day, another Kanye West controversy. This time over shirts sporting the phrase, quote, White Lives Matter.
Well, Paris is the church of fashion.
On Monday, the rapper surprised fans at Yeezy's Paris Week fashion show by posing it up in the design with polarizing conservative commentator Candis Owens.
I believe our government is interested in liberating Ukrainians like I believe that the Black Lives Matter riots were about liberating Black Americans, which is to say, not at all.
The political pundit posted these photos on Twitter. No captions on the pics. It's worth noting the Anti-Defamation League condemns the saying as a, quote, white supremacist phrase, born out of a, quote, racist response to the Black Lives Matter movement. ET's reached out to Kanye's reps about the controversial fashion statement. So far, he's provided no explanation, even though he gave interviews about his new backstage.
And it looked like there's just everything pulled on over the head.
Yeah, that was no zippers. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
The shocking shirts struck a nerve online, especially since it's quite the pivot from who the rapper used to be.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Among the backlash, journalist Jamil Hill, who says, quote, so many folks are trying to excuse Kanye wearing a White Lives Matter t-shirt as just a troll move or marketing, but it's a dangerously dumb message to send for someone with his massive platform. Jaden Smith, who says he left the show as soon as the shirts popped up on the runway, sends a simple message, simply tweeting, quote, Black Lives Matter.
Anyone with a position of power in entertainment should be held accountable for racism.
Activist Mark Lamont Hill calls Kanye's decision, quote, disgusting, dangerous, and irresponsible. Some of y'all will rush to defend him. You should ask yourselves why. While Van Lathan, host of the Higher Learning podcast, argues, quote, the notion that it always has to be about white people in America is incredibly frustrating, emotionally draining, and the whole problem. But here's Kanye apparently centering that notion.
So yeah, so I wanted to give you a sense of kind of what people were saying that objected to it, and I think that it was all but inevitable that people would object vehemently to Kanye West in any way showing any kind of support to conservatives or MAGA type people like Candis Owens. He got a lot of flack for that when he was wearing the MAGA hat and he met with President Trump, then at the time President Trump, and he was interacting with Candis Owens with the whole Brexit thing. And he took a step back, I guess, to try to minimize the backlash or the fallout of that. And now I guess he's back at it again, being his own man, being kind of an independent person. After the wake, I guess, of his divorce with Kim Kardashian, and it's probably goes without saying that whole original controversy with him, interacting with Candace Owens and Trump probably caused a rift between he and his ex-wife. He signaled something like that when he went on Tucker Carlson, which I'm going to get to in a second. But I actually want to talk about kind of like the issue itself, and I kind of lean towards thinking people are overreacting to this. But I do see some validity on the kind of left of center side. So I want to explore that kind of out loud. And I think this would be better to have, a conversation with somebody else who genuinely disagrees with me, but I'm going to try. Okay. So you have Black Lives Matter, and the essential message, if I can steel man it, is supposed to be that Black Lives Matter too, as well, also. And the reason why you would center that notion is if you genuinely believe that black lives in this country generally were being treated as if they didn't matter. And so the loss of a black life in the context of a police officer who shoots a black person and then gets away with the scot-free might be an example where you might use that, express that maxim or that sentiment. Like, hey, this person who died, their black lives mattered. Even if they had a criminal history, their black life mattered. If they got shot or killed extrajudiciously, we don't wave our hands and go, oh well, they were just black, so who cares? No, their black life mattered. And to whatever extent that the relevant police officers who were involved in the shooting were derelict in their duties or abused their authority, they should be held accountable because that black life mattered. That's the essential message of Black Lives Matter. Not that Black Lives Matter more than other people's lives, not that Black Lives Matter exclusively and nobody else's lives matter, not that Black people deserve special treatment and everybody else is just treated regular. Is that Black people have been the victims in various different ways of various forms of persecution and discrimination and oppression throughout history, which is in fact true, it's undeniable, and that some of those things still continue and manifest themselves even today in 2022. Now, that's probably a more controversial claim and one that's a little bit more, less obviously true, but I think that you can demonstrate that in various different ways. However, in any particular instance of a police shooting, it's not clear that the black person is in some sense a victim, though. There are such a thing as justified police shootings, even of black people. So, like, we need to try to take that into account and deal with that reality as we also remain vigilant that police officers aren't willy-nilly abusing their authority and perpetrating that abuse against black people and getting away with it because black people are presumed to have a special connection towards criminality, right? So this is actually a very complicated issue, and I wish that we could talk about it in our discourse and give it the kind of nuance that it deserves, because people left of center who are trying to remain vigilant aren't wrong entirely. There are seeming examples where police officers are a little too trigger happy and they end up shooting people, black people among them, when they probably shouldn't. Okay. There are instances though where police officers do their best and like it's reasonable like it's reasonable for them to engage in lethal force with respect to various different people, not just black people, but black people among them. I think Jacob Blake is probably one of the cases, the best high profile cases I can think of, where the police officers kind of did everything they could before shooting this man, and he was still resisting arrest. And he was still in the process of kidnapping kids and stealing a car that didn't belong to him after he had allegedly, as reported by his girlfriend, digitally raped someone. Now, if all of that is true, and he resisted arrest in the way that is clearly visible on camera, and all of the court documents are true, documenting all of these details, and the people who are trying to defend him don't even deny any of those facts, right? Then yeah, him getting shot in the back, all the times that he got shot in the back, seems to be a justified use of force, even though it's unfortunate because now he's paralyzed, right? And I think also because that happened in front of his kids. His kids were present in the car, right? Um, I'm not saying that I'm proud or happy that Jacob Blake got shot, but what I'm saying is framing that as an illegitimate use of force in order to adhere to a particular kind of narrative that the police are always trigger happy when it comes to black people is itself unjustified and doesn't serve any movement that is actually trying to address actual instances of police brutality. And that, I think, forms the core of my criticism against Black Lives Matter, is that they're so willing to make the facts bend to the narrative as opposed to actually adjudicating these things sensibly, because they have a whole bunch of uber radical, overly emotional people who are among their ranks and who are convinced that all cops are bastards and fuck 12 and fuck the police, and the police is just a gang, and the police are out here murdering black people willy fucking nilly with no consequences. They believe that. And they believe that it happens at such a massive scale that any particular instance of a police officer, particularly a white police officer shooting a black person, is almost necessarily another example in their minds, and that's just not careful enough. Okay, and this is not a person who is under any illusions that police officers are always angels or are always heroes. There are a significant amount of police officers who are terrible at their jobs. They're incompetent. They are trigger happy. They're scary. They have various problematic prejudices against black people, and they probably shouldn't be police officers. I understand that because I got roots in fucking LA. Right? The fucking LAPD have been historically one of the biggest perpetrators of police brutality out of any police departments in the United States. Okay? They're ranked among the top. You have Chicago PD, you have the LAPD, you have the NYPD, right? The list goes on, right? Rodney King, all that shit. I'm not stupid. I have an uncle who was a police officer, and he to this day does not fuck with the police because he saw firsthand when he was a police officer how racist cops can be. He used to work with these motherfuckers. And he and I had a conversation about it about a year or two ago, where he kind of, disclosed that to me. And I was willing to hear him. I was open-minded to it. I don't even think that he thinks that all cops are terrible. I mean, he used to be one. But I think that what he's speaking to is like, yeah, you'd be surprised how many motherfucking cops have problematic views against black people and how that shit is reinforced in terms of the kinds of briefings and information that they get and the policing practices that happen in various different precincts around the country. That shit is problematic. So that's not lost on me. But even consistent with the acknowledgement of all of the ways in which policing has been done wrong historically and is done wrong from time to time now in 2022, I'm telling you that the idea that every single time a police officer, particularly white ones, shoot a black person, that it is always unjustified is fucking stupid. That's not true, right? And you would do well to acknowledge that, even as you criticize police who deserve to be criticized. And police do deserve to be criticized. They do. They really do. So I'm not going to really defend police so much as make an appeal to our better judgment and to our rationality. We need to be sound and mature about this. It's a very high stakes topic. Now, all that being said, Black Lives Matter is centering that issue as a movement, okay? And could probably be extended to some of the aspects of our criminal justice system more broadly that negatively impact black people disproportionately by comparison to their white counterparts in our society. And it's easy to demonstrate that if you know the data. If you know how much more likely it is for a black person to receive harsher sentences for the same crimes by comparison to white people, if you know that statistical data, right, then that at least offers you some support for the kinds of things that people think need to be changed. And that's the kinds of things that people cite as examples of systemic racism. They're actually not wrong about those trends. Those trends actually do bear out, right? And these are fucking like DOJ statistics and shit like that, fam. So like it ain't like they're making it up. However, you can get carried away in your desire to want to get rid or abolish those kinds of systems that have those outcomes by wanting to just get rid of them without any replacements. That is very short-sighted and doesn't really solve anything, because there's all kinds of practical purposes that we have for separating violent offenders from the rest of society, right? If you have violent murderers and violent criminals and rapists at large in your society who have demonstrated that they're willing to do it several times insofar as they don't get caught, what do you do? If you don't have a criminal justice system, if you just abandon it and abolish it and there's no police and there's no law enforcement, what do you do? How do you deal with that problem? Do you just have communities? You just have communities of vigilantes protecting themselves? Everybody becomes Batman or some shit? Like what the fuck? Like what are you gonna do? Right? And how does that not multiply the problem several times over if people have to take the law into their own hands? There are all kinds of practical reasons why you would want people whose job it is to uh, basically maintain law and order, right? But if they're doing it in ways that maximize the likelihood that people are going to get shot and die for stupid reasons, right? Then, I mean, you're just going to have all out lawlessness. It's a free for all. So that's not a solution to anything. Okay. At the same time, if you're going to have a law enforcement agency or several different interconnected ones like we have in our society right now, people whose job it is to serve and protect and whatnot, it's also very, very important to the point of Black Lives Matter activists that those people are the main ones that are not violating people's rights. You need to have that too. We can't have police officers willy-nilly breaking people's or violating people's civil liberties, particularly if it's racially motivated. Not in this country, not with our history. Nah, that ain't cool either. So we can't do nothing either. So then what do? And all of this to say that what I'm really trying to do is get us to appreciate the conundrum that we're in, because this is a legitimate problem. Although I don't think it's as widespread as a lot of the activists make it seem, but it happens often enough that we need to remain vigilant about it. Just because it's rare doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? Because because the next crime may happen to a black man who doesn't have a cell phone and who can't capture it on video, and there may not be a body cam, so we may have no evidence after the fact. So we need to remain vigilant and keep a certain kind of conscientiousness that this thing happens from time to time. Okay, all police ain't heroes. All police are not worthy of our appreciation or respect or to be regarded as heroes, although a lot of them are. So that's kind of my nuanced perspective on that. Call me whatever you want, but I think that that's a mature approach to this. Now, let's go to Kanye West. White Lives Matter. In many ways, I think that the people who have these kind of retorts to Black Lives Matter, what I think they do is partially misunderstand what Black Lives Matter is trying to say. And they are reacting to the more radical factions among them, among their ranks, who say things that are not very careful and who say the opposite of the kinds of things that I just offered a critique to. They are the kinds of people who are saying defund the police, and by which they mean they don't want any police anywhere ever. They're the kinds of people that say all cops are bastards, fuck 12, fuck the police. These are the kinds of motherfuckers that cheer when motherfuckers set up autonomous zones in places like Seattle and Portland and Minnesota and an attempted one in Atlanta in the wake of various different police shootings. And then we got the details of most of these police shootings, and it turned out actually they were more justified than we may have thought originally. And all of the looting and all of the destruction of property and all of the rioting wasn't really justified at all. The motherfuckers that was breaking shit and in many cases, ironically, destroying black and brown owned properties in the name of Black lives were doing it based on reasons that weren't even fucking true. They didn't even understand what was happening. So in many ways, people who have this kind of retort against Black Lives Matter are responding because they recognize these kinds of things. And sometimes people like Candis Owens, they take that shit and they run too far in the other direction with it. And they act like there is no problem with racism at all in this country. and that every black person has an equal opportunity as every white person. And there's no systemic injustices that, like, come on, Candis, stop it. Like, I don't know that Candis knows the data. Maybe she does, but she has various different forms of rationalizations for them. And she blames culture as opposed to systemic forces. I actually think the right answer is that it's actually a mixture of both. There are cultural elements that are toxic, and they do hold our people back to the extent that they fall into those traps. However, the conditions of poverty under which a lot of our people live are the ripple effects of a lot of systemic forms of oppression in years past. And we need to contend with that, because the menu of options and choices that black people have to choose from living under those circumstances is a lot more limited and restrained by comparison to their white counterparts. And so for that reason, or at least partially for that reason, black people are more likely on the whole to make a bunch of bad choices as they try to lift themselves up out of poverty with very limited opportunities to do so legitimately and without resorting to criminality. It doesn't excuse the decision to resort to criminality, but it does explain why there's a prevalence of those decisions being made in those communities, though. So it's a mixture of both. And what I would really like is for both sides to actually be able and willing to admit that it's actually a confluence of both of these things, not one or the other. People make choices under their limited circumstances. They should be held accountable for the choices that they make, but we should also remain vigilant in trying to organize our society in such a way as to maximize the opportunity for people to make better choices in general. If you put more options on the menu of choices that black people get to make in their lives, then they're less likely under those conditions to make the bad choices or the wrong choices that negatively impact their life prospects. That's the basic theory I'm operating under. Feel free to argue against that. Leave a comment in the comment section if you want to. So with all that being said, I'm finally get to matter proper. So White Lives Matter is in some sense, I think, in the spirit of critiquing Black Lives Matter, but is doing it in a way that's somewhat trolly and I think misses the mark in terms of clearly articulating what it is that's wrong with the ways in which proponents of Black Lives Matter operate. And it comes off as a lot of things that I don't know that it's trying to be. Maybe it is trying to be that, but I don't know that Kanye West means those things, and I don't know that Candis Owens even means those things. So what they're saying is like, it's not just Black lives that matter, white lives matter too. And the fact that you find that triggering is a demonstration of how racist you are, ironically, because why is it that the Black Lives Matter shirt is noble and good, but the White Lives Matter shirt is somehow really, really bad? Aren't you a fool? Aren't you an imbecile? You're contradicting yourself. That's the basic message, I think, of that shirt, and at least how it's being implemented by people like Candis Owens and Kanye West. Now, it's being interpreted a lot of different ways. And as you saw in the intro, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start with it, is that some people are thinking that, no, what you're really doing is you're centering white people in a discussion where Black people ought to be centered. And every time we want to address Black issues, this always happens to us. White people always end up getting centered. White people always take over because they're the dominant group and they're historically the ones who have marginalized people, and they always want to take over spaces. Why can't we have our own shit? Why can't we have spaces that are just for certain groups of people who have been historically marginalized, so that they can come together in solidarity with actual allies, so that we can figure out what we want to do and we can take our own political destinies into our own hands, and all of the empowerment that implies. That's the attitude that people are operating under. And so you have a person that's influential like Kanye West, who could do a lot of good in terms of proselytizing wokeness in the Black community, or all of the progressive values that the woke people think are really, really good to proselytize. But he's upending that message or undermining that message by leveraging his platform to convey things that are antithetical to the messages that they value, that speak to the issues that they think are important. And so in some sense, he's a disappointment. And we heard that in Mark Lamont Hill's tweets or comments. We heard that in Jamel Hill, I believe is her name. She's formerly of ESPN. I think she's what publication is that? I can't remember right now. She writes for this one publication that's like well known. It's very left leaning though. It's a magazine. I can't remember what it is now. I can see the colors of it, but I can't remember what it is. I don't know. I might put that in post somehow. But yeah, so I just like, there's a lot of misunderstanding going on both sides for sure. And there's a lot of projecting all of these nefarious intentions from one side to the other going on both sides, and kind of conspiratorial thinking about what the other side is really doing. I don't know that Kanye West is kowtowing for white people or chucking and jiving for white people, but that's the kind of thing that people say about him and Candis Owens. I don't know that there's any real profit in doing it. It seems like Kanye West stands to lose more than he stands to gain. And it seems like Candis Owens is genuine about speaking to the ways with which Black people get manipulated by people left of center. And I think she's right about that. Black people do get manipulated by people left of center all the time. Because of the strict, almost religious adherence to some of these ideological presuppositions and ways of politicking in the Black community that we've normed on historically, especially in recent years with Black Lives Matter and the activism and the kind of new wokeness type activism with Black feminism and shit like that, and queer theory and all that. A lot of people have taken to these ideas, and they take them very seriously. They live by them. They live them out in their lives almost with religious zeal, even though I don't know that they've carefully thought them through or the implications that they have for society. So I'm a little bit ambivalent about how much criticism I'm going to have for the for the White Lives Matter message. The biggest criticism I have right now is that, to whatever extent it's supposed to be a critique of Black Lives Matter, it's not the best one or the right one. It's not an articulate one. It's not clear what exactly you're critiquing, and it just causes more division and more confusion. It seems to be a tactic of pissing off people who sincerely hold views that are counter to the views of those who would wear the White Lives Matter. And if all you're doing is critiquing the fact that they seem to be singling out Black lives in unfair ways, you're kind of demonstrating a misunderstanding of their message. Although, to a certain extent, I think that the Black Lives Matter crowd are guilty of having a message that isn't quite that clear either. It's clear to them, but it isn't being clearly communicated to people who don't have the same presuppositions as them. And if you want to maximize your allyship and cast the biggest net for people to support your movement, then like being coy with your messaging is not a good idea. But if you want to use that, I guess, to weed out the fake allies and to weed out anybody who's not sufficiently woke, then I guess, but that's not a good way to coalition build, to whatever extent you're trying to do that. But I don't know that the radicals want a coalition build. I think the radicals just want purity tests. And so if you don't kowtow to the Black Lives Matter message, that's a purity test. And I think that they think that there's greater utility in that than anything else. And subsequently, I think that people who make a mockery of their messaging, insofar as they're critical of them, they seem to get off more on mocking them for their perceived stupidity than actually offering cogent critiques that are actually like constructive for those who I think genuinely want to do well for Black people. They want to improve the material conditions of Black people. So that's kind of where I stand on that. Kanye West can believe whatever he wants to believe. He can vote for whoever he wants to vote for. He can use his platform whatever the fuck way he wants to use his platform. After all, it's his platform. I'm not a fan of deplatforming people insofar as their politics don't match yours. That seems silly. I've never been a fan of that. I don't like cancel culture at all. I don't think it gets anything done. All it does is push people like Kanye West into the arms of your enemies, because all he did was wear a MAGA hat and you couldn't get over the symbolism of that. And then you interpreted it in the worst way and like got hurt feelings on mostly made up shit that you made up. Shit that wasn't even necessarily true. All you had to do was talk to the nigga and see where his mind is at. The nigga don't think like you. The nigga don't think like most people. That's part of what makes him a genius. But now you're unwilling to acknowledge his genius, because acknowledging his genius would be tacitly to, in some sense, raise him to a status that you no longer want him to have, insofar as he's deviating from your wokeness or your woke precepts. I guess. I just wish people who are left of center would actually like be critical enough to examine their own stances on things, and I don't think that they are. Hella biased, but they're not wrong about everything, and they're right about some things. I would even say they're right about a lot of things. They're just not right about everything. So that's where I stand on that. Call it a hot take if you want. It's relatively neutral, relatively milquetoast. It's not really a super hot stance. I don't really care if people wear White Lives Matter shirts. I don't know that it's supposed. I don't know that wearing Kanye West or anybody influential wearing White Lives Matter shirts is going to upend the issue or the raising of awareness to police brutality, however rare that it is. I don't know that it's going to like increase the amount of Black people that get shot by police by wearing White Lives Matter shirts. I don't know that's going to do anything. If anything, and a lot of people left center not going to like this, the most devastating thing to Black Lives Matter is the fact that they're mismanaging the donations that they got and they're getting exposed for it. That's more devastating to the Black Lives Matter movement than anything Kanye West puts on his back. And that's facts. So deal with that. I'll leave it there, though. Look at me sounding like Tim Pool. Until the next segment. Peace.